Hello, my name is Robert Harrison, and I will be presenting my behaviorist biography project on James Todd, who is a professor at Eastern Michigan University, which is in Ypsilanti, Michigan. He is currently teaching there, and he is a psychology professor. He's also the secretary and treasurer of the Behavior Analysis Association of Michigan. So I had some difficulty finding personal information on James Todd, past that of the university's faculty page, but I was able to learn a lot about him through reading some of his articles. So I hope that was enough. His areas of interest and expertise are pretty wide ranging. It's very interesting that he was an expert witness on both the defense and the prosecution. In order to discuss the validity of pseudoscientific interventions, he talked about facilitated communication specifically as something that he defended and prosecuted for that matter. Um, so that's interesting. I wish I could have found some literature on that, but that's pretty much all I got. He is interested in the application of extinction-induced and schedule-induced behavior to the intervention of aggressive behaviors, which again sounds very relevant to what we're doing and what our careers consist of. However, I didn't come across any articles on that specifically either. He is interested in the analysis of private events, and he is interested in the comparative analysis of scientific systems, which I definitely found as a theme throughout some of the articles that I read. He also demonstrates interest in electronic interventions for persons with handicaps. So the first article that I came across will definitely, reinforce a theme that I noticed throughout reading his articles, and that was kind of talking to non-behaviorists. So this article is entitled "Some Useful Resources for Students Who Are Tempted to Bring Enlightenment to Errant Non-Behaviorists." And he basically suggests two texts that aren't really in any sort of curriculum, but they touch on concepts of social and cognitive psychology, and he feels that any ABA student should read them. He Something that really came kind of pointed out to me in this book was, or excuse me, in this article was when he discussed a behaviorist kind of description of the cognitive psychological term cognitive dissonance. So that was just a really good little example to help me have a better understanding of the behaviorist perspective, which again I noticed was a theme throughout his publications. The next one that I came into contact with was a very dense scientific article that about behavior among rats and whether or not they drank the same amount of water, kind of with or without weight reduction when presented with the same amount of food. And it was really good to dive into that article to get used to all that dense language and to just kind of become immersed, if you will, in the literature. So that was productive. And again, I'm sure at some point all behavior analysts have to work with animals of that nature and do research of that nature. So I thought I should definitely read an article along those lines. So some of the most important contributions to literature, in my opinion, that James Todd was able to contribute were definitely his kind of defense of behaviorism as a science and his clarification of the perspective of behaviorism to some of the critics. And that's why I highlighted the titles on these articles in red, because you can almost kind of see the progression of the arguments and the rebuttals, if you will, and going throughout the titles. So it was just really interesting to come across the first article that was written in 1987. And it was basically a rebuttal to some statements made by other researchers in other fields who are just criticizing behaviorism in general. And this is the first time Todd talked about academic folklore, which he explained that criticism as, and he basically would defend behaviorism as a legit science, and talk about scientific investigation and method and the importance of these things in analyzing behavior. And then the next article, he kind of amps it up a bit and gets he kind of refutes some case studies. He put case studies in quotations that were critical of behaviorists. And he basically cited in this article that these case studies, so-called, they often refer to anecdotes and take things out of context, like Skinner's 12 healthy infants statement, and they blow them out of proportion, and they kind of create a false perception. And he again took it, he questioned the critics as to whether or not this was a productive kind of way to criticize another science, and he encouraged the productive communication among disciplines. And it was just really interesting to see kind of his response, how he would articulate his rebuttals, and then kind of take the higher road and attempt to move forward and become a productive team in being able to identify or being able to analyze behavior. Finally, the last article, he kind of gets specific to some researchers, and again, just takes his argument to the next, kind of level of encouraging collaboration and interdisciplinary communication. So it was just great to read those articles and kind of see the evolution of the arguments, and really get a feel for the background of behaviorism that he had. Some implications of research that James Todd has given are obviously behavior modification and interventions to aggressive behaviors. I think most importantly, he has created a better understanding of the need for scientific investigation among non-behaviorists, ABA students, and other researchers in other fields for that matter. I certainly got a better understanding of behavior analysis through reading his articles, and it was very helpful to do so. Some of the questions that I would ask him in a mock interview, or if given the opportunity to interview him, I would ask him first, what folklore or specific misconception do you believe is the most detrimental to behaviorism as a science? It's obviously a theme of some of the articles that I read of his, and I would just be interested to see what he thought the most important or the most detrimental kind of misconception would be. Number two, of the various researchers from various disciplines, whom did you find to have the most misconceptions or to be the most counterproductive to behavior analysis as a science? This is kind of a more personal question. I think I would just kind of ask to hear his opinion. Again, I got some entertainment value out of reading the articles and the rebuttals, so I would just like his opinion on kind of who was the most annoying, or who was the most misinformed. Number three, I would ask him, what is some essential knowledge or skill that must be used for effective behavior modifications concerning tantrums and aggressive behaviors among humans? Again, I didn't come across much research regarding those things, so I would like to ask him this. Number four, what are some methods that you have used or propose to use in order to analyze private events? I didn't see much literature on any work that he had done or proposed to do with private events, so that's something I would love to ask him. And finally, I would ask, how can findings from research on extinction-induced and schedule-induced behavior apply to interventions of aggressive or tantrum behaviors? This relates to all of our jobs, I'm sure, and so I would just like to have a professional's take on that. So thanks for listening.